This is Matt Finch bringing you today the phases of addiction recovery. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. This is one of the most important topics when it comes to addiction and recovering from an addiction. And let's get into the overview. So today we're going to talk about the phases of addiction recovery. This is a kind of mental model, system, framework, sequence that I created several years ago, and over the years I have refined it more and more, and it's what I use with my individual coaching clients, and it seems to work very, very well. And these phases can be used for any addiction, whether it's a drug, whether it's alcohol, or whether it's a behavior. So let's get right into it. We're going to be talking about what is addiction, just really quickly, and then what is addiction recovery, and then get into the meat of the episode and the training on what are the phases of addiction recovery. So I'm going to provide for you today the roadmap, blueprint, then the 1 through 4 or 1 through 5, depending on how you look at it, sequence for these phases. And then I'm going to provide detailed examples of different people that are going through or that have actually gone through the phases of addiction recovery step by step. So that's going to be really cool. You're going to get the framework, the nuts and bolts, and then to make it come more to life, to help you visualize it more thoroughly and help you to really embody it, we'll be discussing the phases of addiction recovery examples, including people's demographics, psychographics, what substance they're addicted to, their addiction severity indexes, and also their resources and treatments that they used while going through the process. Thus, in this episode, you're going to get the entire process, starting from a state of addiction to a state of powerful recovery. We'll give the examples, including successes and pitfalls, slips, people that have transcended their addiction, and more. And before we get into the phases of addiction recovery, we'll start off with first, what is addiction, and then what is addiction recovery. Addiction is continued use of either a substance or a behavior despite significant negative consequences. I really like the definition of addiction from a really cool book that I read many years ago, actually when I was in school to become a drug and alcohol counselor. I think it was called Neuro-Linguistic Programming in the Treatment of Alcoholism. NLP was something that I learned about and read a bunch of books on really early in my recovery, and I used it for both myself, for personal development, and also I used it with my counseling patients and clients when I was a substance abuse counselor. And NLP is kind of like having a owner's manual for the brain. And here is what I learned about NLP, what I learned from NLP on addiction. Check this out. Using a substance or behavior as a resource is when pleasure and positive benefits greatly outweigh the pain and the negative consequences, making the substance or the behavior a subjective resource for a net increase to quality of life. This is really how I view addiction. For example, when I first started drinking alcohol, habitually, I didn't start really getting into it till I was about 22. I was a late bloomer with alcohol. I liked cannabis for many years before that. But when I first started to really abuse it, it was a resource for me. It was helping me I was really nervous around girls and around other people in general. And at that age, we were partying a lot. And of course, I wanted to be out there and having fun with my peers and hooking up with girls. So alcohol allowed me to become confident. It was liquid confidence. It made me so confident, so euphoric. And I would usually have a really fun time with my friends, and sometimes I'd get lucky too. And since I had such a healthy young liver and brain-body system back then, and since I was in such great shape from surfing a lot and doing other types of exercises and workouts, I was really healthy. I didn't even get hangovers, so I could go binge drink all night and then wake up and feel fine. So back then, alcohol I would consider that a subjective resource for my life. It was adding a lot of pleasure and positive benefits. Remember, this is subjective to my life. So in my opinion, subjectively, it was leading to a net increase to my quality of life. It was, especially with how much confidence it gave me and finally being able to not just talk to girls, but successfully hook up with girls, whereas if I didn't have any alcohol in my system, I was usually way too shy. Back then when I was 22, when I was younger, I was really, really shy. I'm still very introverted, but I am not shy nowadays. So it was a resource for my life. If somebody said, hey, you need to quit alcohol, you're addicted, I would have said, there's no way. On a scale of 1 to 10, it was giving me a 10 pleasure and positive benefits, and only a 1 negative consequences and pain. So it was a huge resource. But over the span of time, maybe about 6 months or a year after I started abusing alcohol, I actually became physiologically and psychologically dependent on alcohol. Now I was getting DUIs, I was getting drunk in Publix, I was blacking out and doing the most horrible things to people that I really loved and cared about. So now all of a sudden, the positive benefits and pleasure was going down quite a bit, and the negative consequences and pain from using that substance spiked up so high. So now it was, well, in NLP they call it an exhausted resource. Now the pain and negative consequences from drinking that beverage actually created a net deficit to my overall quality of life. So it started off as a resource, and all the substances that I used started off as a resource, subjective again, for making my life better in whatever ways. Depending on the substance, it was different resource benefits. Typically, though, I was getting physical and psychological resource benefits. Then, with alcohol and with opioids, those two substances became exhausted resources for me, meaning I became so addicted to them that the negative consequences and the pain that they were causing greatly outweighed the benefits and positive pleasure feeling. Thus, when the pain and the negative consequences especially greatly outweigh the pleasure and positive benefits, that can be such a net deficit, and then that leads people typically to want to start the phases of addiction recovery. And then addiction recovery is simply the process of healing from or outgrowing or even transcending the addiction to where now the substance or the behavior becomes undesirable and moot, at least subjectively. A lot of people at the beginning, when they're in recovery, they still desire the substance or the behavior. They still want to be using nicotine, or they still want to be gambling, or they still wish they could drink alcohol and they have fear of missing out, FOMO, or they still wish they could use opioids every once in a while, or just do some cocaine on Friday nights, maybe once or twice a month, without getting back into addictive use. However, the people that are able to really turn their lives around, transform, and transcend addiction, they usually get to a state where the substance or the behavior becomes not only undesirable and not only a moot substance or behavior, but they actually feel sorry for people that still have to use that to get benefits because they've outgrown it so powerfully and they've transformed their identity so much that they can't even fit in the old shoes of addiction. It's basically like if you imagine somebody in addiction, if they're wearing a size 10 shoes as their addiction lifestyle. Well, if they totally transcend it, maybe their shoe size is now 16, and we're talking Shaquille O'Neal shoe sizes now. Well, there's no way, even if there was a gun to their head, that they'd be able to get back into a size 10 shoe. It just doesn't work. That's how I view outgrowing addiction. And finally, now that we've talked about what is addiction and what is addiction recovery, we come to the phases of addiction recovery, which I view as a mental model or a strategic sequence, a blueprint, something to bridge the gap from being in a state of addiction to having an addiction-free life. The overview of the 5 phases are 1, preparation. I call this phase, this is kind of a pre-phase. It's more of you're not really lowering the substance or behavior. You're not tapering or cold turkeying the substance or the behavior yet. That's officially when the recovery really starts. So I look at phase 1, preparation, as a preparatory pre-phase. Some words you can consider for this phase would be learning about addiction, learning about the addiction that you have. For example, learning about how to quit opioids without going through severe withdrawal, and what are some of the things that work for that. Learning, researching, and also planning. So this is a preparatory phase in which a person is doing research online, in books, talking to treatment professionals over the phone, and that sort of thing. Phase 2 is where the tire meets the road. This is detoxification, or quitting. It's actually getting the substance out of your body, or discontinuing the behaviors, such as if somebody has an online gambling addiction, this would be stopping gambling. Or detoxification for alcohol, this would be getting the alcohol out of your body. There's actually 2 subdivisions of the detoxification phase. One is getting the substance, this has to do with substances, not gambling or shopping addiction, pornography, sex, and so. Number 1 is getting the substance out of the body 100%, and number 2 is detoxing the body in general. A lot of times people have things like heavy metals, other types of toxins, stuff going on, leaky gut syndrome. So it's a matter of detoxifying, which is simply put, getting the substance out of your body, whether slowly through tapering or quickly through cold turkey, and also detoxing the body in general. Because when you detox the body from the substance and in general, then when you go on to the next phase, you're going to be able to, from a detoxed state, you're going to be able to rebuild a lot more powerfully than rebuilding on top of a body that's still toxic. Even though you get the substance out, if you don't do other types of general detox as well, then you're rebuilding and you're tonifying and you're strengthening from a still toxified state. So that's not optimal. Getting on to phase 3, that is repair. I call this repair. Remember, this is just a mental model. Any of the stuff, if it doesn't make sense or if you have a better system, I recommend just taking what you like and leaving the rest. Repair, some other words for this, you can think of rest, rejuvenate, restore, rebalance, rebuild, recharge. So phase 3 is the super R. I like R words because phase 4 is an R word and phase 5 is an R word too. Anyways, but it makes sense. This is also typically if somebody has post-acute withdrawal syndrome, which we'll talk about in a bit here. Phase 3, repair, is when the post-acute withdrawal symptoms and process is going on. Phase 4 is rewire. This usually is the longest phase. And then finally, phase 5 is recover. Although we'll talk about shortly, that's not really a phase. It's more of the phase of the rest of your life from a recovered condition. Now that you have a basic overview of the process, again, it's phase 1 preparation, phase 2 detoxification, phase 3 repair, phase 4 rewire, phase 5 recover. Let's talk about the details of phase 1, preparation phase. Again, this is where you're learning, you're researching, you're planning, and you're preparing. This is all the stuff, and the more time and energy and effort you spend in this phase, and that's what you're doing right now. The podcast is great. This podcast and other podcasts, books on addiction, YouTube videos, it's great because the more you learn about addiction, the more you learn about yourself, the more you learn about recovery therapies and principles and practices and resources, the more equipped you'll be to be able to transcend an addiction. And transcendence I view as not just being in addiction recovery, but again, getting to the point where you outgrow it so powerfully that you can't fit in to the same size shoe that you wore when you were addicted. So that means an identity transformation that is irreversible. I know that if I were talking about that at a Alcoholics Anonymous meeting or a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, that would be sacrilege, and I would probably get stoned by the people with their words, though, because it goes against their beliefs, and so that's fine. The preparation phase ends when the detoxification phase begins, by either starting a taper, or starting a cold turkey quitting of the substance or the behavior. So a lot of people will actually be in the preparation phase for a long time. A matter of fact, this is often the longest phase. People will be too afraid, especially people that have been on, let's say, for example, 10 years of high-dose Xanax. Well, a lot of these people are in the preparation phase, the learning, planning, researching, preparing for a long time, because that is a very difficult, very challenging goal to come off of and heal from 10 years of high-dose Xanax. That's a really difficult one. Other people, they barely spend any time in the preparation phase. Maybe they look up maybe somebody is addicted to Percocet painkillers, and they're crushing them up and snorting them, and maybe they just do a little research online, learn about Suboxone, ask their doctor or psychiatrist if they can get it, and then they switch over to Suboxone and just follow the doctor's orders. So somebody could be in the preparation phase for as little as a day, or as long as even a year or longer. Some people, believe it or not, kick the can down the road for a long time and just continue to research until they feel like they know enough and have researched enough and have planned and prepared enough and are actually ready to start the more active phase of the phases of recovery. And then the final step in the preparatory phase, that would be to schedule the start date of either the taper of the behavior or substance, or the cold turkey quitting of the substance or behavior. And then they have everything prepared for the starting of that phase 2 detoxification. The prep phase can last anywhere from, like I said, a day to a week or weeks, or multiple months, or even a year longer. That brings us to phase 2, detoxification. Remember, this has 2 subsets or 2 subdivisions in this phase, which is the substance or behavior detoxification, and also biochemical detoxification of things like heavy metals, other types of toxins that are other than drugs or alcohol, chemicals, food additives, artificial ingredients, things that have gone in your body, whether you've swallowed them, rubbed them in your skin, inhaled them, and so on and so forth over the years, that they can get stuck in there for a long time. And we're living in a very toxic, poisoned atmosphere these days, with the nuclear bombs that have gone off and nuclear power plants and all the stuff in the air. So you literally just breathing, and some people live where it's crazy smog. It's really good to not just quit and detoxify from the drug, alcohol, or behavior, but also general detoxification. Then there's also 2 ways to detox the substance or behavior. That would be a taper method. Tapering is just systematically reducing how much you engage in the behavior, or how much of the substance that you use over a period of time. You can taper slowly, really slowly, moderate pace, fast, or really, really fast. The taper spectrum, I've seen people taper off alcohol in a week, and I've seen people taper off methadone in 10 years. There's a lot of wiggle room regarding taper speeds, depending on the person and their unique situation. And the second way is obviously cold turkey. That is quitting right away without systematically reducing, lowering the behavior or the amount of substance in consumption. You just stop, just a cold turkey. Now, there are 2 drugs that if you quit cold turkey and you have a severe physical dependence, they could result in death. That is benzodiazepines and alcohol. And there's other substances such as opioids and certain other drugs that Yeah, they won't kill you from the detoxification cold turkey, but it might be such a bad withdrawal that you wish you were dead. That certainly was the case for me. And then going further, you can really, I really love this topic because not only is it so interesting, but it really gives you a significant advantage in the battle, not only against addiction, but also being able to stay addiction free long term and for life after that, or successfully practicing harm reduction if that is your cup of tea. But you can taper a cold turkey from home, by yourself or with professional help. You can taper a cold turkey at an outpatient treatment program, or typically outpatient is tapering, not cold turkey, although there are some facilities that do a cold turkey detox of a substance through outpatient. More typically, you'll find that at an inpatient setting for cold turkey, and typically outpatient for taper, but you can also cold turkey outpatient. Then there's also different things that you can use, such as using nothing to help you taper or cold turkey. There's some people that can just quit and they don't do anything special. Depending on their addiction or the substance or behavior they're quitting, they don't need to take any supplements or use any medications or go to treatment or anything like that. Other people, if they don't use some type of medication, if they're cold turkey withdrawing, then they could be at risk of, like I said before, either dying or having a grand mal seizure, or wishing they were dead because it's so bad, or being debilitated for days or weeks or even longer due to the physical and psychological withdrawal symptoms. So a lot of people use natural remedies or drugs, or both, combination of natural remedies and prescription drugs that are prescribed. And with a tapering or cold turkeying detoxifying, people also can either choose from mainstream traditional treatments and or alternative methods or treatment programs. For example, the typical inpatient or outpatient medical types of detox, or there's also things like ibogaine inpatient detox, or NAD plus infusion therapy 5 to 10 day outpatient detox for the detoxification phase. So there's really so much cool stuff when it comes to this detoxification phase. And then that's awesome because once you have successfully completed this phase, detoxification, which can last from days to weeks to months in really severe cases, like a person that cold turkeys off of 9 years straight of using methadone, and they can't afford the methadone anymore, and then so they get kicked out of the clinic and they can't get any other types of opioids, so they have to cold turkey withdrawal. That detox phase could last months, and I saw that a few times when I worked at a methadone clinic. But typically the detox phase, this is for the acute detoxification. For alcohol, it's usually a few days, and most other substances, it's typically a few days to maybe a week or 2 weeks if it's a long-acting drug, and sometimes can go longer than 2 weeks, but usually the detox phase is anywhere from 3 days to about a week or two, depending on the substance and the person. Phase 3 is what I call the repair phase. The repair phase is, again, this is where there's lots of R words. It's where you rest, rejuvenate, restore, rebalance, replenish, rebuild, restabilize, etc. This is where you're repairing your brain, repairing your gut-brain axis, your central nervous system, CNS, endocrine, your adrenals, liver, literally your entire brain and body, as much as you can, repair. A lot of people will get something after the acute detox has finished called post-acute withdrawal syndrome, also called PAWS. This actually usually happens starting about a week or 2 weeks, or even right after, the next day, once somebody is done with the acute detoxification stage of withdrawal. Not everybody that quits alcohol or drugs gets post-acute withdrawal, but most people, almost everybody, has some repair to do, at least mild repair, on their brain and body after they have detoxed from the substance. I certainly had a whole lot of repairing, and I had pretty severe post-acute withdrawal syndrome pretty much almost every time I ever quit. And the last time my post-acute withdrawal was pretty bad. I was quitting opioids, alcohol, and benzodiazepines. Luckily, I had a few weeks, almost 4 weeks, with no school. I was on winter break, and I was unemployed at the time. And really, I think that's the only reason I was able to get through it. So many other times during post-acute withdrawal, I still had work, and I would just get back on whatever substance it was, alcohol or opioids or benzodiazepines, because trying to work and take care of other responsibilities, domestic duties, all that type of stuff, paying bills, with the post-acute withdrawal is severe physical and psychological symptoms like insomnia, anxiety, severe anhedonia, which is pleasure deafness from lack of dopamine. Yeah, from that total debilitation, I would just say, screw it. I need to make money to pay for rent and other bills, and I can't do that unless I start drinking again or unless I start taking opioids again, etc. PAWS is a biopsychosocial syndrome, which, like I said, typically starts 1 to 2 weeks or so after the acute detox is over, and it results from two things, which is a combination of damage that addiction has done to the brain and body, combined or multiplied by, synergized with, the psychosocial stress of living life without the substance that you were previously addicted to. And the repair phase can last from typically weeks to, in pretty severe cases, it can last for months. And in really atypical, very severe situations, PAWS in the repair phase can even last a year or longer. I've only seen that maybe 2 or 3 times in my entire life, and I've been doing this for around 11 years now, working in this profession, in this field. Usually what I see is a repair phase that lasts a couple of weeks, maybe 2 weeks, for a mild or moderate addiction. And then severe addictions, a lot of times the repair and PAWS phase can last 4 to 6 weeks or even 8 to 12 weeks. Usually, if people are doing a RAD supplement and nutrition protocol, at minimum, even the most severe addictions, I've seen people repair, even at old age. I've seen people with severe addictions in their 60s and early 70s get better, repair really powerfully within about 4 to 6 weeks. So, the more you use natural therapies during the repair phase, typically the faster you can heal from it and the shorter that phase has to be. Moving on to phase 4, I call this Rewire. The Rewire phase and rewiring, this is usually, but not always, the longest phase. And I'd say that most people, at least that I've experienced, that I've worked with and talked to and read about, most people continue to return to an active use of the substance or the behavior before their neural pathways, their neural circuitry of addiction, pathways of addiction, have actually faded away and then also been replaced with neural pathways of wellness from addiction. The good news is that by correcting things such as neurotransmitter deficits, excesses, imbalances in general, like dopamine deficiency, glutamate excess, GABA deficiency, etc., and correcting things like hypoglycemia, endocrine dysfunction, either an upregulated or a downregulated central nervous system, and things like that can be done pretty quickly. Like I was saying before, often within weeks to maybe 1 to 2 months, typically. 2 weeks to 1 to 2 months is very common repair phase for generalization example terms. But then in severe cases of PAWS, then the repair phase can last, like I was saying, 2 to 3 months or even longer. And then you can shorten that with proven strategic natural therapeutics. And there's things that you can get prescribed from doctors as well that can not necessarily shorten the duration of pause, but certainly mitigate, alleviate both physical and psychological symptoms. So that's the good news. The bad news is that rewiring, phase 4, often takes time. You've probably heard the quote before, when neurons fire together, they wire together. And that's true. The more we do something, the more our neurons build together and potentiate together. For example, when I used to play hacky sack, when I first started playing, I was horrible. I could only kick the hacky sack 1 or 2 or maybe 3 times in the air before it would fall down. My friend and I got way into hacky sack when we were around 14 or 15 years old, and we would play for hours a day, a few days a week. So we built so many neural pathways for hacky sack skills that in a pretty short amount of time, in a few months, we were amazing at hacky sack. And then after playing for years together and teaching our friends, and our friends would get better and better. So the more our neurons fired together playing hacky sack, the more we built these powerful neural pathways for hacky sack skills and doing tricks and being able to volley with each other. The same thing happens with addiction, only typically it's more powerful than a hacky sack neurons firing together. And then long-term severe addiction can often take a year or even several years before these pathways, these circuitries of addiction fade away. A lot of times, and certainly for myself, people will build up what I like to call superhighways of addictive process neural pathways, which makes it really easy to continue to use the substance or behavior. And even when somebody quits, and even when they get through the detox and they get through the repair, due to the rewiring taking a lot longer for, you can pretty much rebuild your neurotransmitter endogenous neuropharmacy pretty quickly, and even faster than that, you can fix hypoglycemia. But as far as the neural pathways, those you have to really stop the substance or behavior and then stay abstinent for usually quite some time for those neural pathways to start fading away and fading away. And, when you have a superhighway neural circuitries for the addictive process, it takes a long time to fade away. But over time, they keep fading from a superhighway to a regular highway to a 45 mile per hour speed limit, two-way road. And then finally, you keep going, they fade away to one-way dirt roads. And then you keep going and keep going. On top of those old superhighways of addiction, they fade away to one-way dirt roads and then into trails and then to hiking trails, and they fade away to where you'd have to use a machete to be able to keep walking. That's the goal. And in their place, on top of that, then you do the opposite. You build superhighways, neural pathways of wellness from addiction, new neural circuitry on top of the old ones of addiction that are fading and fading away. You're rebuilding, reconstructing, repotentiating neural circuitry pathways that make staying addiction-free really easy. And due to the fact that rewiring is oftentimes a slow process, not always, but it's usually a pretty slow process, the active neural pathways that make using the substance or the behavior addiction easy to return to can often lead the person to reactivating the addictive process. And then the progress that they made in the rewiring unfortunately goes away, and then the addiction wiring gets stronger again. So the key is, this is really important, the key is to have patient endurance to get through the rewiring phase. And then you can also focus a lot, as well as having patient endurance, on things that rewire you faster, such as BDNF. That's an acronym for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. You build BDNF through things like high-intensity interval training and other types of exercises, and also an over-the-counter supplement named lithium orotate. That also increases BDNF. BDNF has been called a miracle grow for the brain. Why? Well, it leads to something called neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is literally the process of creating, birthing new, healthy, optimized brain cells. And while I thought of it, before we move on, if you haven't already listened to it, I highly, highly recommend listening to episode 286. That is titled Patient Endurance for Addiction Recovery. It is one of the most fun, helpful, important episodes that I've ever recorded, and I'll put those in the show notes of this episode as well, so you don't have to look around the website for it. You can just go to elevationrecovery.com/podcast, unless you're already on the show notes page, and click on this episode. There's also a search bar on elevationrecovery.com. On the right-hand side, on a desktop or laptop, there is a search this website, so you can type any topic or title in there, any keywords, and it gives you, really awesome search results. So if you didn't know about that, now you do. And then getting back to making the rewiring phase shorter and getting over it quicker, moving on from patient endurance and ways to boost BDNF, you can also rewire faster doing things like personal development. And in this category, you can think of things like reading self-help books, books on psychology and philosophy, etc., doing journaling, learning and practicing mindfulness, seeing a in-person or virtual over the phone or computer therapist or a counselor or a recovery coach, etc., or some type of a hypnosis professional. These are all cool things that could be done through personal development. That's a really fun topic too, and it is a very important key to making the rewiring phase go by faster and finish sooner. Additionally, spiritual growth. And in this category, you can think of things like religious practice and practicing and having and growing faith, meditation, things like prayer, going to and participating in your church, or like a Bible study, or regular attendance of your Buddhist temple, going to Catholic confession, and maybe Christian counseling, or just moving along and just not going for the religious stuff. For example, spiritual seeking, and seeking into and study and practice into Eastern and Western metaphysics. All of those things, again, patient endurance, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, personal development, and spiritual growth. In my opinion, I'm probably leaving something out, but in my opinion, these things right here really can allow you to rewire your brain and learn to think differently and outgrow and transcend addiction very, very fast compared to not using these. After the rewire phase becomes the phase that I like to call recover. Now, the entire process of going through these phases is the process of recovering from addiction. So I'd say starting from detox and then moving on, that's all recovering. This is all the process of recovering. So why did I name phase 5 recover? Well, the final phase is called recover, but it's not actually technically a phase. It's more like a finish line. In the stages of change, which is a concept for addiction, treatment, and recovery, the final stage of the stages of change is called termination. It comes right after the maintenance stage of change. Starting from the beginning of the stages of change, it goes from pre-contemplation to contemplation to action to maintenance, then to termination if there's no relapse back into it. The termination stage of change is after somebody has been in recovery, in a maintenance phase of in recovery from addiction. Then termination is the outgrowing, the transcendence. It is, okay, I really have got this problem solved. I fixed it. wow, I have made such an awesome transformation, and now termination. Now you don't need to worry about relapse prevention and all that. In early recovery, in the first few months, a lot of people, that's addiction recovery. They're in recovery from addiction. But, it's not like you're going to stay in recovery from. Are you going to be recovering from an addiction for your entire life? Well, it's up to you whether or not you want to be a person that is permanently in recovery. It's your identity, it's yours, and you can shape it and you can interpret it however you want. AA members and NA members usually call themselves addicts or alcoholics or addict alcoholics their entire lives, even if they've been sober for 30, 40, or even 50 years straight. I have heard people at meetings with 40 years saying, I am an alcoholic. Hi, my name's John and I'm an alcoholic. They haven't drank or used drugs in 40 years. They still consider themselves an alcoholic, although an alcoholic in recovery. That doesn't make sense to me. Feels like just like you recover from cancer or recover from an injury or recover from trauma, feels like there should be a finish line to the recovering process. It shouldn't be, I've been cancer recovery, 30 years after you've been cancer free. That doesn't make sense. I'm in shoulder recovery 30 years after I've healed my shoulder. That doesn't make sense. I am in recovery from alcoholism, 50 years after I quit drinking. Well, that doesn't make sense to me. But it makes sense to some people. So what I would suggest is that whatever identity seems the most empowering to you personally, then go with that. For some people, calling themselves addicts and or alcoholics, even 20, 30 years after they have quit and they're still going to meetings and sponsoring people, well, if that works really well for them, for their identity, then go for it, It's to each their own, really. It never made sense to me. And I didn't like the dogma that not the big book, but the people that read the big book and learned the program would try to enforce on me. I get to choose. You get to choose. I don't call myself an alcoholic or an addict, and I don't also call myself a person in recovery. I don't call myself a sober person or a sober person in recovery. None of that. The way I view myself, my identity, is I simply had a severe long-term addiction to both drugs and alcohol. Then I went through the phases of addiction recovery, albeit I didn't know much back then. I didn't know the language and the mental model of the system of the phases. But then I eventually recovered. Capital R, capital E, capital C, capital O, capital V, capital E, capital R, capital E, capital D, exclamation mark. Recovered in all caps with an exclamation mark. And that is the reaching of the finish line. I reached the finish line and I completed the process. So phase 5 for me was recovered, exclamation mark, finish line, completion, which for me did take many years. But then again, I was making things up as I went along and I was learning as I went. I didn't have a podcast like Elevation Recovery or any type of mentor or system or blueprint like this to follow. And I also had a bunch of work to do on myself. So it took me years before I could claim that I was recovered from addiction, not in recovery from addiction, but recovered. I had a lot of missing links, biological, biochemical, psychological, mental, emotional, social, spiritual, and environmental. I had missing links in all the domains of the hierarchy of addiction, treatment, and recovery that qualitatively and quantitatively were very significant. Some of the most significant things like childhood trauma, as well as adult trauma, multiple mental health issues, and as well as innate neurodivergence, innate high sensitivity, innate empath trait, and innate extreme introversion, combined with long-term poisoning, no other way to put it really, poisoning of my brain and my body, as well as my mind. And that is how I like to think of the process of addiction recovery and the phases. Here's a recap. Phase 1, preparation, is basically a pre-phase. Then the detoxification phase and the repair phase, phases 2 and 3, they're the main phases and the most active ones. Phase 4, rewire, that's the stage that usually lags a lot and usually takes longer, as the brain neural pathways can't be fixed quickly, usually, and it takes patient endurance and lots of changes in the way you think to get through. The final stage, recover, is not really a phase of the process, but actually the finish line of the process, and the phase of life that I'd say comes after you've recovered, in all caps with an exclamation mark, from addiction. You could think of it as the grand prize of completion, or the reward for embracing the suck, or at least accepting the suck, maybe even honoring the process of recovering and healing from addiction. Not everyone has or wants to have an identity transformation like this. For example, we just talked about 12-step folks. They're never, as far as I know, there might be some people out there that are different from this, but as far as I've experienced and seen, it seems like they're never fully recovered, and they are a permanent addict or alcoholic or both, or a permanent addict or alcoholic or both that is in recovery as their identity. And again, I'll reiterate, if that works for somebody, epic, great, good for them. If it doesn't make sense, like for me it didn't make sense, for my co-host of this podcast, Chris Scott, it never made sense, then you certainly don't have to follow it. It might be an empowering identity for some, but for many it is a disempowering identity, and the empowering identity is being recovered, all caps, exclamation mark, from addiction. And that leads us to the end of this episode. I think you can tell I am very passionate about this subject. I usually never get bored of teaching it. It's really fun for me. Before I wrap this up, I'll just give you, I'd say, a few keys to recovering from addiction. This is in a nutshell. So we just talked about the 5 phases of substance or behavior addiction recovery. Now here's the keys to recovering in a nutshell. 1 is to know yourself. 2, know addiction. K-N-O-W, yourself. K-N-O-W, your addiction. 3, know the phases of recovering. 4, start the process. 5, keep going even when it gets hard. 6, finish. Know yourself, know addiction. Know the phases of recovering, start the process. Keep going even when it gets hard. Finish. Examples of people transitioning from phase 1 to phase 5 or even phase 4, because not everybody makes it to phase 5. That takes a lot of work and usually takes a 10 out of 10 dedication and resolve to achieve it. Here is Mike. Mike is a 45-year-old male that has drank daily since the age of 43, and that was after he got divorced and he lost custody of his 2 teenage daughters. Before losing custody in the divorce, he drank heavily, but not every day. That's what led to the divorce and to losing custody, was he was a heavy drinker. After the divorce and losing custody, he became a daily heavy drinker, and constant blackouts, anger outbursts, unreliable, scary to be around, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, dual personality. That led to the divorce. But he would have days or weeks or sometimes even a month where he was off alcohol, but he was a dry drunk, and he was miserable a lot of the time, and so he would go back to alcohol. After the divorce and not having his kids anymore, here he finds himself at age 45 consuming approximately 15 to 20 or even 25 shots of room temperature Jack Daniels per day, and chasing it with ice-cold Coca-Cola. Mike is overweight, sedentary. He works from home on his laptop, which started during the COVID lockdowns. His diet is pretty much garbage. He doesn't drink all that much water. He's very hypoglycemic. And every time he tries to detox, the insomnia, the anxiety, and the shame are just too much to handle. And he can't even make it through phase 2 of detoxification. Part of the reason is because he doesn't do enough of a job in phase 1. He really hasn't, and that's a key here. He just kind of skips phase 1 or doesn't put hardly any time into phase 1. He just goes straight into detox. He doesn't do the preparation. He doesn't do much preparation, learning, planning, and research. For Mike, alcohol is an extremely exhausted resource. And he finally breaks down one day and he decides he needs to get serious about looking for help. Now is where Mike seriously, legitimately, officially enters phase 1, preparation, where he does learning, researching, and planning. Mike Googles, quote, how to quit drinking without withdrawals, end quote. Then he finds an article on using low-dose Ativan, which is a benzodiazepine anxiolytic, which binds to the same types of receptors that alcohol binds to, which are the GABA receptors, by a doctor or treatment program or psychiatrist or hospital to stop drinking alcohol more comfortably and while simultaneously preventing the possibility of delirium tremens or a grand mal seizure or even death. He Googles alcohol treatments as well and finds a lot of articles and also ads, ADS, on different things like inpatient medical detox. There's a lot of articles and also ads for that. Outpatient NAD plus infusion therapy 5-day detox, which he had never heard about, and he looks more into it, and it's way too expensive and his insurance doesn't cover it, so he kind of quickly dismisses that one. The Sinclair method, which he had heard about before, but didn't think that he wanted to take a medication long term. The Vivitrol shot outpatient, which was pretty expensive, and he didn't want to get a monthly injection if he didn't have to, and more. For the next few weeks, he explores more on these methods by reading articles and studies, watching YouTube videos, and listening to podcast episodes. He also orders a book online called 7 Weeks to Sobriety, which is about stopping alcohol, using vitamins and other supplements, plus diet customizations. Mike then attends an appointment with his psychiatrist, who prescribes him, after he describes his situation to the psychiatrist, his psychiatrist prescribes him a 4-day supply of lorazepam. That is the generic for Ativan, that very first alcohol detox method that he found when he first started Googling after he had his nervous breakdown. After Mike fills the lorazepam prescription, he then goes home and orders the book, 7 Weeks Sobriety. And when that book comes the next day, he goes through it and finds the sections on the supplements. And before he even gets into reading the book, he orders all the recommended supplements from the book. The next thing he does is he tells his boss that he wants to take a 4-day weekend off of work this next coming weekend. And his boss says, yeah, no problem at all. You can totally do that. Now Mike is about to transition from phase 1, preparation, to phase 2, detoxification. And he even tapers down his whiskey, his Jack Daniels, somewhat, leading up to his 4-day weekend. And he does this by lowering his consumption by 2 shots per day. So every day as it nears towards his 4-day weekend that he's going to do for the detoxification phase, he goes from 20 shots down to 18 to 16 to 14 to 12 to 10. He gets all the way down to 8 shots of whiskey, or maybe 10 shots of whiskey per day. And that's Friday. And then after work Friday, Mike goes to the grocery store and he purchases lots of Gatorade, over-the-counter nausea medicine like Pepto-Bismol, and some Imodium AD. He gets a 30-pack of these cherry-flavored vitamin C / electrolyte powders that he can mix with water. He buys oatmeal and milk and cereal, berries and bananas, mac and cheese boxes, a 12-pack of ginger ale, and several other foods and drinks that he thinks will be easy to fix up and that he believes will not be difficult to hold down when he consumes them while he's doing this acute alcohol withdrawal process. Then Saturday, when he wakes up, until Tuesday before bed, those 4 days, he uses the lorazepam medicine as prescribed, which was 1 tablet every 6 hours, and he stays home, binge-watching shows and binge-watching movies, and he takes a long walk every night, and he takes a hot bath every morning because he wakes up every morning pretty anxious and sore and some weird temperature fluctuations, and the hot bath first thing in the morning helps him quite a bit to just go sit on his lazy boy or his couch and put a blanket on and relax. He drinks lots of fluids, and he eats pretty light those 4 days, although he does consume enough food to feel okay and not to feel too weak and hungry and to have too low of blood sugar. Mike was able to easily alleviate the majority of the withdrawal symptoms other than feeling very exhausted and mildly anhedonic. His sleep was decent, and he didn't have anxiety or too bad of temperature fluctuations and goose flesh. On Wednesday morning, Mike gets back to work and transitions from the detox phase 2 to phase 3, repair, and he begins using the supplements as outlined in the 7 Weeks of Sobriety book. He takes his 2 dogs for a short walk in the morning. He also goes outside for 5 to 10 minutes at a time during work breaks every hour or hour and a half, and since it's the beginning of the fall, it's still nice and sunny and warm where he lives, and he soaks up the warm sunshine, and he really looks forward to those breaks during his work from home on his laptop day. On his lunch break that first day back at work, he has a 45-minute picnic outside in his backyard, totally immersed in this sunshine, and his 2 dogs are with him out there too. Mike eats a homemade turkey sandwich, and he washes it down with some homemade iced tea, and after eating, he and the dogs take a short walk. After work, Mike takes his dogs on a 45-minute walk at the park nearby, and then he orders Thai barbecue chicken delivery, yummy, yummy, for dinner. Then he watches an inspirational movie starring Ben Affleck about an alcohol-addicted person that gets sober. Then he takes a CBD extract and lavender essential oil and magnesium chloride infused hot bath in candlelight before bed. And then after that, he rinses off with some cool water, and he puts on his cozy robe. Then he reads a few pages from the 7 Weeks of Sobriety book, using his new amber book light and sitting in his cozy recliner chair with his 2 dogs asleep right at his feet. His sleep is poor due to not having any more of the lorazepam, but after taking some extra GABA and 5-HTP, which are amino acid supplements, GABA is an amino acid and 5-HTP was a serotonin booster. GABA is a GABA booster, which he learned from the book. After he takes some extra of those, he's able to sleep pretty well. Not great, not even good, but okay. And after a week straight on a mostly similar daily routine as the one I just discussed, Mike starts a fitness regimen at the gym, and 3 to 4 days per week does mild to moderate intensity workouts consisting of resistance training, lots of weightlifting, cardio, and stretching. He also adds a protein powder, a pre-workout supplement, and a fat loss metabolic supplement to his alcohol recovery supplement protocol and regimen. Mike also gets a 60-minute deep tissue massage one time and starts playing regularly 3-on-3 half-court basketball pickup games at the local rec center 2 evenings per week with 2 of his buddies. Within 3 weeks, Mike feels amazing and looks great. Within 4 weeks, Mike feels extraordinary and has made an epic recovery from alcohol physically, mentally, and emotionally. Mike then transitions from the repair phase to phase 4, Rewire. Mike continues using the supplements and working out and eating well most of the time. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. Most of the time. And he starts working with an addiction therapist. He learns and practices meditation, continues reading books about addiction and recovery, and by the advice of his therapist that he starts to see, Mike begins attending once per week SMART recovery meetings. That stands for self-management and recovery training. A lot of CBT, a lot of personal development, a lot of worksheets. They have professional group facilitators and workbooks. And Mike had tried AA in the past and didn't like it, so his therapist recommended SMART recovery meetings, and he found that it's a great fit. Over the next 2 years, Mike transforms into a completely different person. He no longer misses alcohol or thinks about it, and in fact, the thought of it disgusts him, and it poses no threat as a potential danger anymore. Mike has fully recovered through his strategic recovery and long-term healing. Mike transitions from the Rewire phase after 2 years to recovered, all capital letters, exclamation mark. And he enjoys being able to turn the page to the start of a brand new chapter for his life. Next, we have Cora, who is a 22-year-old female that has been addicted to opioids for 5 years since she was age 17, when at the time she found out that her boyfriend, she had a new boyfriend at age 17, not long into the relationship, she found out he was a dealer, an opioid dealer. Back then he was selling pills. And when she found out, she didn't care. She had done some drugs before, and she had never tried opioids, though she had done alcohol and some cocaine and marijuana and ecstasy. Well, he offered her a line of oxycodone that he crushed up and put out into a line, and she said, okay. And he gave her kind of a small one to start off. She snorted it and loved it. All capital letters, loved it. All of her feelings of discomfort in her own skin melted away in mere seconds, and in their place, feelings of total comfort, confidence, relief of concerns, euphoria, excitement, and serenity, all mixed together. It was by far the best she had ever remembered feeling in all of her life. Her boyfriend later on gets raided by the DEA and goes to prison, and then Cora, at the new age of 22, who by this time the two of them had graduated from pills. That's what opioid pills are, is prescription opioid addiction is heroin addiction training wheels. By this time they are both addicted to snorting white China heroin on the East Coast, the Northeast. And she was up to about 2 to 3 grams daily on average. So her boyfriend, the dealer that she gets the free supply from, goes to jail, goes to prison actually, getting raided by the DEA, and she was not home at the time, fortunately for her. Now she had no free drugs and no money to purchase it for herself. But she was, 5 years, such a big habit, such a long-term use, that even though she couldn't afford it, she also couldn't afford to go through the withdrawal syndrome, which is so horrible. She tried to get through withdrawal, and she didn't know anything to do. She didn't know that there was certain withdrawal remedies. She was really naive. Mike, or her boyfriend, really just kind of kept her secluded, and they just stayed home a lot and did drugs and watched TV and had sex and that type of thing and go to the store. So she didn't know a whole lot. She was pretty young and ignorant. Couldn't make it through the withdrawal. Way too hard. And then so what happened was she traded sex from another heroin dealer to prevent going through the withdrawals. She knew of another heroin dealer that was Mike's backup guy, not his main, or her boyfriend's backup guy, not the main guy, but the backup guy. So she got a hold of him, asked if he could front her a bag of heroin. He said no, but he said, hey, if you do sexual favors for me, then I'll give you all this heroin right here. And after a few months of trading sex for heroin, Cora feels so much shame and no future for her life. And she reaches a really ultimate bottom. And that leads her into phase 1, preparation. And Cora begins doing research. She starts phase 1, preparation, research, learning, planning, by texting her friend Zelda, who had quit opioids a year ago. And she asked her how she did it. Zelda used to be her best friend, and they would do drugs together and lots of opioids together, but Zelda disappeared and shut Cora out of her life because she didn't want to relapse back onto opioids. And so they had been estranged from each other until now. And Zelda responded that she quit by using Suboxone therapy and was prescribed it by using this new online treatment service called QuickMD.com. Cora created a free account to QuickMD.com right away, and she was able to easily and quickly schedule a Suboxone appointment with a doctor for the very next day. And she chose the phone call option when given the option between that or a video call. All she had to do was create her free online account and then pay with her card $99 to book the appointment, which she paid using her debit card on the website. Well, the next day at the appointment time, the doctor calls her on the phone and speaks with her for about 15 minutes. Then, after the doctor had the session with Cora, they sent digitally a 30-day Suboxone prescription to Cora's pharmacy. And an hour later, she gets a text from the pharmacy that it's ready. She doesn't have the money. It's pretty expensive. Even as a copay with her insurance, she doesn't have the money. The $99 to book the appointment was pretty much the last of her money. So, luckily, she's able to borrow the money from Zelda to purchase her month's supply of medicine, as it's a little pricey, but albeit still way cheaper than the heroin. That's for sure. And she didn't have to trade sex for the Suboxone either. As outlined by the doctor, Cora waits until she is in moderate heroin withdrawal before beginning the medication, which is FDA approved for opioid use disorder. Technically, this is her switching from phase 1 to phase 2 detoxification. However, while she's detoxing off heroin, turns out the active ingredient in Suboxone is actually an opioid, and it fills inside the same mu opioid receptors in the brain and body that heroin also fills in and binds to and turns on. After 3 weeks on the Suboxone opioid replacement medication for heroin withdrawal and addiction, Cora alters the strategy of her phase 2 detoxification, and then she starts to taper off of Suboxone. So she detoxes off heroin using the opioid Suboxone, or the main ingredient in Suboxone is buprenorphine, a partial opioid agonist, whereas heroin is a full opioid agonist. But she's still on opioids, so she's not fully detoxifying from opioids. Then she starts tapering. That's systematically over the next 3 weeks, lowering gradually the dosage of Suboxone in her bloodstream. Then she transitions 100% off the drug, and then it takes about a week to fully leave her body, as it has a pretty long half-life. And so next, her body is totally free from opioids. And since she used Suboxone very short term, and then tapered off quite strategically. The symptoms coming off it were minor. Then, so that's her completing phase 2, detoxification, then transitioning right into phase 3, repair. Well, it turns out she was clueless, totally clueless as to the benefits of things like supplements and diet, exercise, etc. And she didn't even know that that it was beneficial to do a repair on her brain and body after long-term opioid use disorder. But fortunately, Zelda invited her to come try CrossFit with her one morning. And Cora felt so absolutely euphoric and relaxed and uplifted after that first CrossFit workout with Zelda that she was instantly hooked. And since she had Zelda to do CrossFit with, it was easy to stick with, and they would meet for coffee right before their early morning workouts too. Within about 4 weeks of being in the repair phase, Cora, at her young age of 22, and her intense fitness protocol, she was feeling the best she had ever felt in life, and she also looked her best too. The intense 4 days a week, 4 early mornings a week of waking up early, meeting her friend for coffee, doing a hardcore CrossFit workout, that helped her sleep, rock and roll, that facilitated a extremely healthy appetite for lots of water and lots of fresh fruits and vegetables and healthy proteins. And then she moved on after 4 weeks of repair right into the Rewire phase. About a year of doing CrossFit. And also, she got way into personal development seminars and self-development books and health and wellness strategies. The CrossFit was kind of the keystone habit. It was the domino that led to all these other dominoes of lifestyle, health, and wellness improvement. Started to get knocked down one after the other. And a year of doing CrossFit, health and wellness, just never-ending, constant, never-ending personal development and improvement, reading, seminars, courses. She reaches the final phase and she becomes recovered, all capital letters with an exclamation mark. The immense CrossFit lifestyle helped to rewire her brain fast, and that synergized with her passion for personal growth and self-transformation. She read around 1 or 2 books per week, typically, and they were on self-improvement and other topics that between all this reading and all this CrossFit, high-intensity interval training, and healthy mind-body-spirit living, she radically rewired her brain and recovered fully. But that wasn't the end. After that, she became a certified addiction recovery coach and began working with other women in addiction to help them bridge the gap from addiction to not just to recovery, bridge the gap from addiction to recovered, all capital letters, exclamation mark, as she did. Now that you have those 2 examples of Mike and Cora, we're going to move into some rather brief and also generalized, kind of generic examples, but a little different than the previous examples. What I had intended to do was provide you with about 4 or even 5 of those in detail examples and stories of people, unique situations and people going through the process of these phases. However, I went so deep into it, in fact, that actually it took way longer than I had originally anticipated. Thus, I think you're also going to really like how I have the rest of this episode. And what I'm going to do now is go through each phase, and you're going to learn different things that people can typically do in each of these phases. So these are action steps and strategies, habits, behaviors, resources for each of the phases that are common in each of the phases, that are helpful, that are awesome. Phase 1, preparation. Research, learn, plan, prepare. In this phase, you'll find things such as reading articles, reading studies, reading books, even reading magazines, watching videos, watching podcasts, watching documentaries or docu-series, listening to podcasts, listening to audiobooks, talking to people that you know, calling up or emailing treatment programs, studying from various websites, scheduling your detox start date, buying supplements, groceries, doing laundry, cleaning your home, getting a babysitter scheduled, and scheduling time off from responsibilities like work, kids, school, getting prescription meds and or over-the-counter medicines ready during phase 1. Phase 2, detoxification. Things like tapering off painkillers at home over a 3-month period, or taper off benzodiazepines at home over a 9-month duration. Quitting alcohol cold turkey at home. Quit alcohol at an inpatient medical detox for 4 days, where the doctors provide both intravenous and oral medications for the alleviation and mitigation of alcohol withdrawal symptoms, as well as micronutrient infusion therapy in the form of banana bags and more. Quit alcohol at an outpatient NAD plus 5-day infusion therapy treatment protocol, which consists of customized oral comfort medications like anxiety medications, anti-nausea medications, with the main heavy lifter, NAD plus, in high-dose infusions several hours a day during those 5 days. And then you go to your home or go to a hotel or an Airbnb or go stay at a friend's house every night to go to sleep. So it's an outpatient medical detox where there are medications used, but the main heavy lift or the main protocol is actually a natural metabolic enzyme that alcohol destroys and that declines with age. Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NAD+, which helps with DNA repair, cellular regeneration, mitochondria, neurogenesis, and withdrawal symptoms, post-acute withdrawal symptoms. It's kind of like getting a detail on a car and getting some good work done on it as well. Quit methamphetamine cold turkey at home. Quit Xanax at an inpatient medical detox, where they give you pregabalin and a few other comfort meds for 6 days straight. And phase 3, repair, you'll find things such as supplements, including perhaps multivitamin, vitamin C, vitamin D, CalMag zinc, omega-3s, amino acids, CBD oil, and whey protein powder. Exercise, like walking, weight training with free weights and or machines, and calisthenics, cardio machines, jogging, sprinting, yoga, stretching, qigong, tai chi, hiking and bike riding, rollerblading, gardening, sex, and sports. And then diet, pro-recovery diet, and nutrient-rich foods and drinks combined. Environmental medicines, including sunlight therapy, grounding therapy, thermal stress therapy in the form of hot therapy or cold therapy, body work such as massage therapy and acupuncture and Reiki, breathing exercises, binaural beats, isochronic tones, and other types of brainwave entrainment, and neurofeedback, hypnosis, meditation, hugging, laughing, playing music and listening to music, and nature immersion. Phase 4, Rewire. Some of the best things include physical strategies like high-intensity interval training, intense exercise, and the lithium orotate supplement. All of those increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which is Miracle-Grow for the brain, as it increases, stimulates, enhances, fosters, cultivates neurogenesis, the stimulation and birth of new, healthy, optimized brain cells. Some psychological strategies like personal development, reading, journaling, coaching, counseling, therapy, mindfulness practice, gratitude practice, compassion, and spiritual strategies, spiritual growth and evolution, spiritual seeking and reading, meditating, prayer, faith, acceptance, harnessing and focusing and developing of the spiritual will. Finally, phase 5, recovered, all capital letters, exclamation mark, new chapter of life. You are the writer, the director, and the lead role actor. Other challenges in life are certain, but being recovered from addiction, and this way you can no longer fit in the addicted personality due to such a big, huge, enormous, gigantic, massive identity transformation, permanent identity transformation, and so much psychological maturity and spiritual growth. Here are my final thoughts. One of my favorite books is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And in that book, he talks about going into a war where there's several battles. And I really like that for transcending addiction, too. Here's my synthesis of that for addiction. Imagine going into a war where there are several battles. If you don't know the enemy, nor yourself, you'll probably lose to the enemy of addiction. If you don't know yourself, but you do know the enemy of addiction, you might win some battles, but you'll probably lose the war and relapse over and over. If you know yourself and you know the enemy of addiction, you'll probably achieve recovery from addiction. And if you deeply, profoundly know yourself and addiction, you'll likely reach phase 5 and become fully recovered and complete the challenge and life lesson and phase of life. And as always, thanks so much for listening, my friend. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you on the next episode.